The air was thick with the stink of ash and molten iron. All around her the battlefield groaned with the weight of ruin, collapsed towers, shattered barricades, and the bodies of her fallen kin. Zira's chest heaved inside the cracked plates of her armor as she staggered back, clutching the long spear that had served her since initiation. Its shaft was scarred from countless clashes, but tonight, under the merciless crimson glare of the twin suns, it reached its end. With a sharp crack the weapon split in her hands. Half of the spear clattered uselessly to the ground, the jagged edges glowing faintly with the residual heat of the last parry. Her grip tightened on the broken length that remained, but the truth pressed against her like a blade at her throat. She was weaponless. Encircling her, the Karak war beasts moved in. Each one was a nightmare sculpted from steel and flesh, towering reptilian hulks whose metallic hides glowed with furnace heat, their fangs dripping a corrosive acid that hissed when it struck the stone floor. They advanced in perfect unison, a predator's circle tightening around its prey. Their commander, a beast larger than the rest, with tusks curving upward like sickles, raised its claw. The gesture was not a signal to strike, but to wait. They wanted her to feel it, the fear, the inevitability. Zira knew the stories. The Karak didn't just kill, they broke. They delighted in drawing out the moment until hope withered into despair. And here she stood alone, her clan already fallen in the dust, her honor bound to this last stand. Her body trembled not from fear, though fear slithered cold in her veins, but from exhaustion. Hours of fighting had drained her strength, each clash of claw against spear shaving away what little she had left. The weight of survival pressed down on her, heavier than her shattered armor. She thought of her kin, the laughter around the fire before the assault, the pride in their eyes when she was chosen to carry the spear of her ancestors. That pride burned in her chest now, mingling with grief. She wanted to honor them. She wanted to fight until the last breath, until her arms could no longer rise. But she was only one, and they were many. The Karak closed in, their furnace, glow eyes reflecting her broken form. The circle was unbreakable. She tightened her grip on the jagged spear shaft, raised it in defiance though it shook in her hands, and whispered the old words of farewell. If the stars must witness my death, let them burn brighter for it. A hiss rolled through the beasts as they prepared to strike. Claws flexed, talons scraped against the stone, acid dripped like venomous rain. The commander's maw opened wide, a guttural roar vibrating the very air. Zira's pulse thundered in her ears. She raised the broken weapon higher, knowing it would not stop them, but refusing to fall kneeling. She would not cower. If her death came now, it would come standing. And in that breath, that fragile heartbeat between despair and annihilation, the world itself seemed to shift. The sky above screamed, a tearing sound of atmosphere splitting open. A streak of fire burned across the smoke-choked heavens. The Karak hesitated, their circle faltering for the first time. Shadows danced in the sudden light as something plummeted downward, trailing sparks and flame. Zira's eyes widened. Whatever it was coming fast, straight into the heart of the battlefield. And for a moment her fear was swallowed by something else, not hope, not yet, but the faintest spark of curiosity, fragile as embers in the ash. The roar from the heavens grew louder, building into a shriek that drowned out even the snarling Karak. All eyes, beast and warrior alike, turned skyward. Through the smoke-choked air a streak of fire tore across the battlefield. At first Zira thought it a falling star, but no, its descent was too controlled, too purposeful. The streak angled downward with terrifying velocity, a comet sent not by chance, but by intent. The ground exploded when it hit. Stone and ash erupted in a thunderous wave, flinging several of the war beasts back. Zira stumbled, shielding her face from the blast. When the dust settled, a crater yawned in the earth, steam rising from its edges, and at the center stood a figure. He was tall by her people's standards, though not towering like the Karak. His frame was wrapped in scorched armor that looked crude compared to the sleek plating of the galaxy's warrior races. Metal patches overlapped like scales, some clearly scavenged from different origins, welded together with no elegance. A makeshift pauldron hung off one shoulder, dented but functional. The chest plate bore scratches deep enough to suggest he'd walked away from battles most would not. And in his hand not a plasma rifle, not a pulse blade, not even a shard of crystallized energy, just a jagged length of steel pipe, its edges rough and splintered as though it had been torn from the skeleton of a ship. He lifted his head, and Zira froze at the sight of his eyes. Not glowing like the Karak furnaces, not slit like her own people's, but dark, steady, alive. A fire burned there, not the cold precision of predators, but something hotter, wilder. The circle of beasts recovered from their shock, growling low. Acid dripped from their jaws as they began to close in again. The newcomer turned his head slightly, noticing Zira for the first time. Dust streaked her face, her armor cracked, her weapon broken. She expected pity, or worse, indifference. Instead, he smiled. A crooked, utterly inappropriate smile, as though this battlefield was nothing more than an inconvenience. And then, in a voice calm and startlingly casual, he asked, "Mind if I join the fight?" The absurdity of it almost made her laugh. Here stood a creature she had only heard of in whispers, humans, the short-lived, fragile species from the distant spiral arm, often dismissed as primitives, and he was offering to face the Karak with her, armed with nothing but a piece of scrap metal. The Karak roared in mockery, a sound like grinding gears. One beast lunged, claws extended. The human didn't flinch, he moved. Faster than Zira thought possible, he sidestepped the charge and swung the pipe in a vicious arc. The impact cracked across the beast's skull with a metallic crunch. Sparks flew as the war beast reeled, stumbling backward with a guttural snarl. The circle faltered. The human pressed forward. His movements were raw, unpolished, almost chaotic. But every strike landed with bone, crushing force. He didn't fight like a soldier trained in perfect forms. He fought like someone who had clawed his way through too many battles to count, someone who treated every breath as borrowed and every enemy as the thing standing between him and the next sunrise. Zira's heart pounded as she watched him. This was not technology. This was not refinement. This was will, condensed into flesh and steel. The human wrenched the pipe free from the beast's jaw, spinning it once in his grip. He glanced at her again, his grin somehow wider despite the blood spattering his armor. "You're not done yet, are you?" he asked. Her fingers tightened on the broken spear shaft. For the first time since her clan had fallen, she felt something stir inside her chest, something fierce, something alive, not hope, not yet, but the promise of it. "Do you want me to expand Keynote 3 fearless attitude into another 600 words so the saga keeps its flow, like a chapter? By chapter HFY novel?" The circle tightened again, but the atmosphere had shifted. What had been a predator's feast now felt like a test of endurance, and the human stood at its center like someone who had chosen the challenge, not stumbled into it. Zira could barely comprehend his composure. The Karak war beasts were legends of terror. Entire colonies fell under their claws, their acid jaws melting steel, their sheer bulk capable of crushing armored soldiers. Even she, raised in the warrior caste of her people, trained to meet death with unflinching resolve, had felt the tremor of fear coil around her bones. But the human, he grinned, not the grin of arrogance or bravado, but of someone who enjoyed standing on the knife's edge. His posture was loose, shoulders relaxed, pipe held almost carelessly in one hand. Where most beings would be calculating escape routes or bargaining with fate, he looked as though he'd walked into the wrong tavern and found a brawl waiting for him. The Karak commander's furnace eyes glowed hotter as it lowered its tusked head. With a guttural command, 3 beasts lunged at once, their massive forms closing in from different angles. Zira braced herself, expecting him to fall beneath the weight of sheer numbers. But the human didn't retreat, he didn't hesitate, he advanced. With a roar of his own, raw and primal, He darted toward the nearest beast. The pipe swung upward, catching the monster under its jaw with such brutal force that its head snapped back. Before it had even collapsed, the human pivoted, ducking beneath the swipe of another and ramming his shoulder into its gut. The impact should have thrown him off balance, but instead it sent the much larger creature staggering. The third beast came from behind, claws descending like scythes. Zira's breath caught. She was about to shout a warning, but the human twisted, almost sensing the strike before it landed. The claws raked across his pauldron, sparks flying, but he rolled with the blow, turning the momentum into a spin. The pipe cracked down across the beast's wrist, snapping bone. He laughed, a full, unrestrained laugh that echoed across the battlefield, wild and defiant. Zira's heart lurched. This was madness. No soldier she knew would ever laugh in the face of the Karak, not when death loomed so close. Yet in that laugh there was no fear, no resignation, only the exhilaration of living fully, even on the brink of annihilation. The beasts growled, confused, unsettled. Predators fed on fear, and here was a creature that gave them none. Instead, he radiated something alien to them, defiance so reckless it was infectious. The human turned slightly, glancing back at Zira with a spark in his eye. "Well, you just gonna watch, or you want in on this." The words, spoken so casually in the middle of carnage, burned hotter than any war cry. Her grip tightened around the jagged shaft of her broken spear. For the first time since her weapon had shattered, she felt the tremble in her hands steady. She surged forward, placing herself at his side. The beasts recoiled, sensing the shift. The lone prey was no longer alone. Side by side they faced the circle again. He raised his pipe in an almost playful salute, as though daring the Karak to try their luck once more. Zira lifted her spear fragment, her stance firmer now, her chest rising with renewed breath. The commander roared in fury, the ground vibrating beneath its furnace lit rage. The human only grinned wider, wiping blood from his brow with the back of his hand. "Come on, then," he muttered, his tone casual, almost amused. "Let's make this interesting." And for the first time in the long history of the Karak, their circle wavered, because predators had found themselves staring not at prey, but at something far more dangerous, an enemy that did not know how to fear. The Karak pack surged as one, furious at the insolence of resistance. Their furnace-lit bodies glowed brighter, venting steam from their armored hides. They didn't fight like soldiers, they fought like a storm, teeth, claws, and sheer weight crashing down all at once. And still the human charged into them head on. Zira had seen warriors fight with precision, drilling forms until they became second nature. She had seen soldiers fight with discipline, moving as one unit under a commander's barked orders. But this was something else entirely. The human fought with chaos. He swung the pipe in brutal, unpredictable arcs, every strike designed not for elegance but for damage. The jagged edge of the metal split hides, shattered teeth, and left sizzling wounds where sparks flew from impact. He moved like water one moment, flowing past strikes too fast to follow, then like stone the next, planting his feet and letting raw strength turn the simplest blow into devastation. A beast lunged, maw gaping, acid dripping from its tusks. He didn't retreat. He stepped inside the bite, slamming the pipe upward into the roof of its mouth. The creature screeched, thrashing, but he held his ground, forcing the jagged steel deeper until the light in its furnace eyes dimmed. With a grunt, he wrenched the weapon free, rolling clear just as another beast's claw carved the space he'd occupied. The motion should have left him vulnerable, but he used the momentum, spinning low and smashing the creature's knee. Bone and metal crunched, the beast roared, collapsing to one side. Before it could rise, the human leapt onto its back, driving the pipe down again and again until silence claimed it. Zira's chest tightened. This wasn't a duel. It wasn't combat as she had been trained to know it. It was survival distilled into movement. Every strike, every dodge, every brutal blow screamed the same truth: I will not die here. She darted forward to cover his flank. Her broken spear wasn't much, but she used it like a dagger, striking at weak joints while he kept the beast's attention. Together, they became something terrifying, her precision cutting where she could, his raw ferocity ripping apart the rest. And still he laughed. The sound was wild, unrefined, yet it carried through the clash of claws and the screeches of dying beasts. It wasn't arrogance, it was exhilaration, the laugh of someone who had found meaning in the madness of survival. The Karak faltered. These were predators born to break armies, not to be broken themselves. Yet here was a single human tearing through them with nothing but stubborn will and a piece of jagged metal. Every time one fell, the circle shrank. Every time he roared back at them, their confidence cracked. The commander finally entered the fray, tusks gleaming with acidic drool. It was larger than the rest, its hide darker, its steps shaking the ground. The human's grin only widened at the sight. You look important, he muttered, spinning the pipe once in his grip. Let's see what you've got. The beast lunged. He met it head on. The impact rang across the battlefield. Pipe against claw, human against monster. Sparks exploded as steel screeched against metal hide. The commander swiped again, and again he countered, each blow rattling his battered armor. Still he pressed forward, teeth gritted, muscles straining, refusing to give an inch. When the beast reared back to crush him with its tusks, the human slid under its guard, driving the pipe upward with every ounce of his strength. The jagged metal pierced through the softer flesh beneath its jaw. The commander roared, thrashing, but the human clung on, twisting, forcing the weapon deeper. Zira stared breathless as the commander toppled, crashing to the ground with a thunderous impact. The circle broke completely. The remaining Karak hesitated, then began to retreat, snarling but unwilling to face this madness any longer. The human stood amidst the carnage, chest heaving, armor scorched, blood splattered across his face. He leaned on the pipe, still grinning as though he'd just won a tavern brawl, rather than turned the tide of a massacre. That was when Zira understood. This was why humans were feared, even when dismissed as fragile. Not because of their weapons, not because of their technology, but because when cornered, when the world closed in, they became something raw and unstoppable. The kind of force that tore through predators with nothing but willpower and refusal to die. The battlefield stank of acid and ash, the ground slick with molten blood. Steam hissed from the corpses of the fallen Karak, their furnace, glow dimming as silence reclaimed the ruins. Zira staggered, the weight of exhaustion finally dragging at her limbs, her broken spear shaft trembling in her hand, and then she looked at him. The human stood amid the wreckage, pipe in hand, chest rising and falling with heavy breaths. His armor was battered nearly beyond recognition, smoke curling from the cracked plates. Yet there was no hesitation in his posture, no trembling in his legs. He planted the jagged pipe into the earth, leaning on it casually, and looked around as though the slaughter had merely been a warm-up. Zira's mind reeled. She had trained her entire life for battle. Her people's weapons were crafted with precision, their strategies drilled through generations of warrior tradition. And yet all of that had fallen to the Karak's merciless strength. Her unit had been wiped out despite years of preparation, and then this human, this impossible creature, had dropped from the sky with nothing but scrap metal in his hands, and somehow, impossibly, he had turned the tide. She found herself staring too long. He noticed. You fight well, he said between breaths, his voice roughened by smoke but steady. Then he grinned, that same crooked grin that had burned into her memory the moment he'd arrived. But you were about to die without me. The words might have stung, but instead she felt a rush of something unexpected. Relief that she wasn't alone anymore. Relief that, for once, death had been denied. She allowed herself a bitter chuckle. And you would have died without me covering your flank, His grin widened. Fair enough, I guess that makes us even. The exchange was simple, almost absurd, but it carried weight. In that small trade of words something solidified, a bond forged not from trust, not yet, but from survival. The Karak commander still twitched weakly, its massive body sprawled across the battlefield. The human walked over, and with a grunt yanked his pipe free from the beast's maw. He examined the jagged weapon, blood and ichor dripping down its length, then swung it experimentally. Still good. Zira shook her head in disbelief. You're insane. He laughed at that, the sound rough and unrestrained. Probably, but insanity works, doesn't it? Her gaze drifted across the battlefield. The circle of predators was broken. Her people's honor was not entirely lost. And all because of this fragile looking being whose kind most considered primitive. Perhaps, she thought, insanity does work. She stepped closer, still clutching her broken spear. What do they call you? He looked at her for a long moment, as if weighing whether to answer, then simply said, Illy. Illy, she repeated, tasting the foreign name. I am Zira of the Shathar. He nodded, then offered her a hand, not as warriors of her people did, clasping forearms in ritual greeting, but palm open, fingers extended. Unsure, she hesitated before taking it. His grip was warm, firm, grounding. For a fleeting instant, the battlefield seemed distant, and the world narrowed to the strange alliance of two survivors who should not have stood victorious. When the silence stretched too long, Illy spoke again, his tone more serious now. They'll be back, you know that, right? Beasts like these don't forgive. Zira exhaled, her pride stung but her spirit steadied. Then we'll face them together. The word hung between them, heavier than her shattered spear, sharper than his jagged pipe. Together, a human and a Shathar warrior. Two broken weapons, one battlefield, and somehow, against all reason, it felt enough.